At some point in the next few seconds, your heart will beat. You won't notice it. You never do. It has been beating since before you were born, somewhere around 22 days after conception, before you had a brain to be aware of it, and it will keep beating without your permission or attention until the moment it stops. What happens after that moment is something most people have never been told, not because it is secret, because no one thinks to explain it. Death is the most universal human experience and the least understood in its actual mechanics. We know what it looks like from the outside. We almost never talk about what it looks like from the inside, not as philosophy or religion, but as biology, as a sequence of events that can be measured, timed, and documented. That sequence is stranger than most people expect. The clinical definition of death has changed more times in the last 50 years than in the previous 5,000. For most of human history, death was the stopping of the heart. Simple, visible, final. Then medicine got complicated. Ventilators could keep a heart beating after the brain had stopped. Defibrillators could restart a heart that had stopped. The boundary began to move. Today, most medical systems define death as either cardiac death, the permanent cessation of the heart, or brain death, the irreversible loss of all brain function, including the brainstem. These are not the same event, and the gap between them is where the biology gets interesting. When your heart stops, it stops delivering oxygen to your brain. The brain is the most metabolically demanding organ in your body. It consumes 20% of your oxygen supply despite being only 2% of your body weight. Without oxygen, brain cells begin to fail within seconds. Within 4 to 6 minutes, the damage becomes irreversible under normal conditions. This is the window that defines emergency medicine. The entire architecture of CPR, defibrillation, and cardiac arrest response is built around those 4 to 6 minutes. But here is what happens inside that window that almost nobody talks about. In 2023, researchers at the University of Michigan published a study in which they monitored the brain activity of patients who died of cardiac arrest while connected to EEG machines. What they found was not silence. In the 30 to 60 seconds immediately following cardiac arrest, several patients showed a surge of high-frequency brain activity, gamma waves, of a kind associated in living patients with conscious perception and dreaming. The dying brain was not shutting down quietly. It was, in some measurable sense, switching on. This finding did not come from nowhere. A 2013 study from the same institution had found the same surge in dying rats. The hypothesis is that the loss of oxygen triggers a last coordinated electrical discharge, a kind of neurological emergency response that may generate intense subjective experience in the final moments of consciousness. Whether this is related to the near-death experiences reported by cardiac arrest survivors, the tunnel, the light, the panoramic life review remains an open question. But the electricity is real. The surge is measurable. Something is happening in the dying brain that we do not yet fully understand. Below the level of the brain, the rest of the body is running its own timeline. Your cells do not die when your heart stops. They begin dying, which is a different thing. Each cell in your body has its own oxygen reserve, its own metabolic processes, its own internal clock. When the supply line cuts off, each cell begins consuming whatever remains. Muscle cells can survive for several hours. Skin cells can remain viable for up to 24 hours after cardiac arrest. Bone cells can survive for several days. Corneal cells, the transparent surface of the eye used in transplant surgery, can remain transplantable for up to 12 hours after death. This is why organ transplantation is possible. The organs are not dead. They are dying on their own individual schedules, at their own individual rates, racing against a clock that started when the heart stopped. Your gut microbiome, the several trillion bacteria living in your digestive tract, does not receive the message at all. These organisms have no loyalty to the host. When the immune system that kept them contained begins to fail, they begin consuming from the inside. Within hours, they are moving through the intestinal wall into surrounding tissue. This process, combined with the release of digestive enzymes that were previously kept contained by living cells, is what initiates decomposition. The body does not decay because of external forces. It begins consuming itself. At the same time, something is happening at the cellular level that most people find difficult to process. In 2019, researchers at Yale University took pig brains that had been dead for 4 hours, well past the window of any possible resuscitation, and connected them to a system called BrainEx. The system pumped a synthetic solution through the brain's blood vessels, restoring circulation without oxygen. Within 6 hours, the brain showed restored cellular function. Neurons were metabolizing. Immune cells were responding. Some basic cellular activity had been restored in an organ that had been clinically dead for 4 hours. The researchers were careful to note that they detected no signs of consciousness or coordinated electrical activity. The brains were not aware, but the cells were alive again. The boundary between dead and not dead, which had seemed like a wall, turned out to be more like a gradient, a process, a transition that, under the right conditions, could be interrupted. The legal and philosophical implications of this research are still being worked through. If cellular death is reversible hours after cardiac death, what does death actually mean? At what point in the process does a person cease to exist in any meaningful sense? These are not abstract questions. They determine when organs can be harvested, when resuscitation efforts should stop, when a person can be declared legally dead. There is a moment in the process that pathologists call the moment of somatic death, the point at which the organism as a whole has irreversibly lost the capacity to function as an integrated system. This is different from cellular death, which happens later, and it is different from brain death, which may happen earlier. These three events, the death of the brain, the death of the organism, and the death of the cells, are three separate points on a timeline that medicine is only beginning to map with precision. What happens to consciousness during this transition is the question that medicine cannot yet answer. The subjective experience of dying, if there is one, is inaccessible by definition to anyone who has completed the process. The accounts of people who have been resuscitated from cardiac arrest describe experiences that are consistent across cultures and individuals in ways that are difficult to explain as pure confabulation. The light, the sense of detachment, the accelerated review of memories. These reports are real, even if their interpretation is contested. What the neuroscience can say is this: the brain does not go quiet when it dies. It does something complicated and measurable in its final moments, something that looks from the outside like an attempt. Your heart will stop, the oxygen will stop, the cells will begin their individual reckonings, the bacteria will begin their work, the electricity in your brain will surge, for reasons that are not fully understood, one final time. And then the process that started 22 days after your conception, before you had a brain to know it was happening, will complete itself. Without your permission, without your attention. Exactly as it began.